The cathedral was magnificent that crisp autumn morning, its soaring Gothic arches draped in white roses and ivy, creating an atmosphere of timeless elegance. 200 of the city's most influential guests filled the mahogany pews, their designer outfits and expensive jewelry reflecting the golden light streaming through stained glass windows. Elena Rodriguez stood in the bridal suite, adjusting her grandmother's pearl necklace as she gazed at her reflection in the antique mirror. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of French lace and silk, custom designed by one of Europe's most sought-after couturiers. Everything appeared perfect on the surface. The venue, the decorations, the guest list that read like a social register of the wealthy and powerful. Yet beneath the flawless exterior, Elena felt a gnawing anxiety that she couldn't quite explain. At 28, she was marrying Richard Ashworth III, heir to one of the oldest banking families in the country. Their engagement had been celebrated in society pages across the nation, hailed as the perfect union between two prominent families with deep roots in American aristocracy. Richard possessed all the qualities that her family valued: impeccable breeding, substantial wealth, and the right connections to elevate the Rodriguez family's social standing even higher. Her parents had orchestrated their introduction at a charity gala 2 years earlier, and the courtship that followed felt more like a carefully choreographed business merger than a romantic love story. Elena's mother, Victoria Rodriguez, bustled around the bridal suite, ensuring every detail was perfect for what she called the wedding of the century. The Rodriguez family had built their fortune in real estate development, but Victoria had always yearned for the social acceptance that came with old money and established bloodlines. As Elena's bridesmaids, daughters of senators, ambassadors, and corporate titans, gathered around her with champagne and nervous laughter, she tried to suppress the feeling that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and there was no turning back now. Block 2. The groom's secret. In the groom's preparation room on the opposite side of the cathedral, Richard Ashworth III adjusted his platinum cufflinks while his groomsmen shared expensive whiskey and told familiar stories about their privileged upbringings. Richard smiled and laughed at appropriate moments, but his mind was occupied with far more serious matters than wedding day pleasantries. At 32, Richard had spent his entire life playing the role of the perfect heir, attending the right schools, joining the appropriate clubs, and maintaining the family reputation that had been carefully cultivated over 5 generations. However, beneath his polished exterior lay secrets that would devastate not only Elena, but both their families if they ever came to light. Richard's banking empire was built on a foundation of fraud and money laundering that stretched back decades. What appeared to be legitimate international finance was actually an elaborate scheme to hide assets for criminal organizations, corrupt politicians, and tax evaders around the world. Richard had inherited not just wealth, but a criminal enterprise that required constant management and increasingly dangerous alliances. The marriage to Elena served multiple purposes beyond family expectations. The Rodriguez family's real estate holdings would provide perfect vehicles for laundering additional funds, while Elena's spotless reputation would offer another layer of legitimacy to his operations. Her father's political connections could prove invaluable in deflecting future investigations. Richard had been careful to conceal his activities from Elena during their courtship, presenting himself as a conventional banker managing family investments. He had cultivated relationships with several government officials who could protect his interests, and his charitable donations had bought silence from organizations that might otherwise ask uncomfortable questions about the source of his wealth. As his best man, Jonathan Ashworth, his younger brother, handed him the wedding rings, Richard felt no guilt about deceiving Elena. In his world, marriage was a strategic alliance, not a romantic partnership. Elena was beautiful, well-connected, and naive enough to never question his business practices. She would serve his purposes perfectly. Block 3. The uninvited guest. 3 blocks away from the cathedral, Alexander Alex Morrison sat in his Tesla, staring at the imposing stone structure where the woman he had loved for 5 years was about to marry another man. At 35, Alex had built a technology empire worth $12 billion, but all his success felt meaningless without Elena by his side. Alex and Elena had met during their graduate studies at Harvard, where she was pursuing an MBA while he was completing his PhD in computer science. Their connection had been immediate and profound, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. They spent countless hours discussing everything from philosophy to social justice, sharing dreams of using their eventual success to make a positive impact on the world. Their relationship had blossomed over 2 years of study, late-night conversations, and shared ambitions. Alex had been preparing to propose when Elena's father suffered a heart attack during their final semester. Elena had rushed home to help manage the family business, and their relationship gradually dissolved under the pressure of distance, family expectations, and divergent paths. Elena's parents had never approved of Alex. Despite his obvious intelligence and entrepreneurial promise, he came from a working-class background and lacked the social pedigree they deemed appropriate for their daughter. They had systematically undermined the relationship, creating obstacles and encouraging Elena to focus on more suitable prospects from their social circle. After graduation, Alex had thrown himself into building his company, creating revolutionary software that transformed how businesses managed data security. His success had been spectacular, but every achievement felt hollow without Elena to share it. He had followed her life from afar, watching through social media and mutual friends as she became engaged to Richard Ashworth. Now, sitting outside the cathedral, Alex wrestled with the decision that had brought him here. 3 weeks earlier, his private investigator had uncovered disturbing information about Richard's business activities. Alex possessed evidence that could destroy Richard and protect Elena from a disastrous marriage, but using it would mean shattering her world and possibly alienating her forever. Block 4. The investigation. The evidence in Alex's possession had come at great personal cost and considerable risk. For months, he had struggled with the knowledge that Elena was engaged to someone who could be dangerous, not just financially, but potentially physically. His conscience wouldn't allow him to remain silent, regardless of the personal consequences. Alex's investigation had begun innocently enough, a routine background check on Richard's business dealings, motivated by concern for Elena's well-being. What he discovered was a sophisticated criminal network that extended across multiple countries and involved some of the most powerful people in international finance. Richard's bank had been flagged by several government agencies for suspicious transactions, but his family's political connections had prevented serious investigations. The evidence Alex had compiled included financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from former employees who had witnessed illegal activities firsthand. The most damning evidence was a series of encrypted communications between Richard and known criminals, discussing plans to use Elena's family properties for money laundering operations after the marriage. Richard viewed Elena not as a wife, but as an unwitting accomplice who would provide legitimacy and access to clean investments. Alex had also discovered that Richard had been involved in the suspicious death of a whistleblower who had threatened to expose the bank's activities 2 years earlier. While no criminal charges had been filed, the evidence suggested that Richard had ordered the elimination of anyone who posed a threat to his operations. The investigation had consumed Alex's time and resources, requiring him to work with international law enforcement agencies and put his own safety at risk. Several attempts had been made to hack into his companies and steal the evidence, confirming that Richard was aware of the investigation and considered Alex a serious threat. As Alex sat outside the cathedral, he knew that revealing this information would destroy not just Richard, but potentially Elena's entire family. Her father's business had unknowingly facilitated some of Richard's activities, making him an accessory to criminal behavior. The scandal would ruin the Rodriguez family's reputation and possibly result in criminal charges. Block 5. The ceremony begins. Inside the cathedral, the wedding ceremony commenced exactly on schedule, with the processional music echoing majestically through the vaulted space. Elena's 8 bridesmaids glided down the aisle in their champagne-colored silk gowns, followed by her younger sister Maria as maid of honor, who cast a worried glance toward Elena despite her radiant smile. Father Miguel Santoro, the family priest who had baptized Elena and presided over 3 generations of Rodriguez family celebrations, stood at the altar beside Richard and his groomsmen. The priest had known Elena since childhood and had privately expressed concerns to her mother about the rushed engagement, but his objections had been politely dismissed. Elena's father, Carlos Rodriguez, walked slowly down the aisle beside his daughter, his recent health problems evident in his careful steps and labored breathing. Despite his physical frailty, Carlos radiated pride and determination as he prepared to place Elena's hand in Richard's, believing he was securing his daughter's future with one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. The assembled guests represented a cross-section of American power and influence: senators, ambassadors, Fortune 500 CEOs, and old money families whose ancestors had shaped the nation's history. Several Supreme Court justices sat in the front rows, along with media moguls and international dignitaries who had flown in specifically for the ceremony. Elena moved gracefully down the aisle, her face composed and serene despite the turmoil in her heart. She had spent the previous night questioning her decision, but her mother's tears and her father's poor health had convinced her that backing out would be selfish and destructive to her family's carefully laid plans. As she approached the altar, Elena caught sight of Richard waiting for her with his characteristic confident smile. He looked every inch the perfect groom in his custom-tailored morning coat, his sandy hair perfectly styled, and his blue eyes reflecting the cathedral's golden light. To the assembled guests, they appeared to be the ideal couple. Young, beautiful, wealthy, and destined for a fairy tale life together. Father Santoro began the ceremony with a blessing, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics as he spoke about the sacred nature of marriage and the commitment being made before God and community. Block 6. The Moment of Truth. Father Santoro's voice resonated through the cathedral as he reached the most solemn portion of the ceremony, the traditional words that had been spoken at countless weddings throughout history. The assembled guests sat in reverent silence, witnessing what they believed to be the union of two souls destined for each other. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and in the presence of these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, Father Santoro intoned, his weathered hands holding the leather-bound prayer book that had been used for Rodriguez family ceremonies for generations. Elena stood beside Richard, her hands trembling slightly as she held her bouquet of white orchids and baby's breath. The weight of her grandmother's pearl necklace seemed heavier than usual, and she found herself thinking about the stories her grandmother had told about following her heart despite family opposition when she married Elena's grandfather. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly or unadvisedly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. The priest continued, his eyes moving between Elena and Richard with the wisdom of someone who had officiated hundreds of weddings and witnessed both joy and tragedy. Richard stood confidently at Elena's side, his public persona perfectly intact despite the knowledge that his criminal empire could crumble at any moment. He had received reports that morning about suspicious activity around his business operations, but his security team had assured him that any threats were being handled appropriately. If any person can show just cause why these two should not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace, Father Santoro pronounced, the ancient words that had become largely ceremonial in modern weddings, but still carried the weight of tradition and sacred obligation. The cathedral fell into the deepest silence Elena had ever experienced. She could hear her own heartbeat, the soft rustling of expensive fabric as guests shifted in their seats, and the distant sound of traffic from the city beyond the thick stone walls. In that moment of absolute quiet, she closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer for guidance, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Block 7. The Objection. The silence that followed Father Santoro's traditional words stretched longer than usual, creating a tension that seemed to fill every corner of the cathedral. Just as the priest was about to continue with the ceremony, a voice rang out clear and strong from the back of the church. "I object!" 200 heads turned in unison toward the source of the interruption, gasps and murmurs rippling through the assembled guests like a wave. Alex Morrison stood in the last pew, his tall frame and determined expression commanding immediate attention despite his position at the back of the cathedral. Elena's heart stopped as she recognized the voice before she saw the face. In the 5 years since their separation, she had imagined hearing Alex's voice in crowds, in elevators, in coffee shops. But this was unmistakably real. Her bouquet trembled in her hands as she turned to see the man who had once promised to love her forever. Richard's face transformed from confidence to fury in an instant, his jaw clenching as he recognized the threat that Alex represented to his carefully orchestrated plans. His security team, strategically positioned among the guests, began moving subtly toward Alex's position, awaiting Richard's signal. "This is highly irregular," Father Santoro said, his voice uncertain as he looked between Alex, Elena, and Richard. In 40 years of performing marriage ceremonies, he had never encountered an actual objection, and the ancient protocols suddenly felt very real and very serious. Alex began walking down the center aisle with purpose and determination, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. He wore a simple black suit, elegant but understated compared to the ornate morning wear of the wedding party. His presence commanded attention not through wealth or social position, but through the sheer force of his conviction. Elena found herself unable to breathe as Alex approached the altar, his dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that reminded her of all the dreams they had once shared. The 5 years of separation seemed to collapse in an instant, bringing back memories of late-night conversations, shared laughter, and the connection that had once seemed unbreakable. Victoria Rodriguez rose from her seat in the front row, her face pale with shock and anger. "This is outrageous! Security should remove this person immediately!" But her voice seemed small and ineffective against the drama unfolding before the altar. Block 8. The Revelation. Alex reached the altar area and turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics. His demeanor was calm but resolute, the bearing of someone who had made an irreversible decision and was prepared to face any consequences. "I object to this marriage because the groom is not who he claims to be," Alex announced, his words creating a new wave of shocked murmurs throughout the cathedral. "Richard Ashworth is a criminal who has deceived not only Elena, but everyone in this room about his true nature and intentions." Richard stepped forward aggressively, his genteel facade cracking to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. "This is preposterous. Security, remove this man immediately. He's clearly unstable and trying to disrupt a private ceremony." "I have evidence," Alex continued, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a thick folder of documents. "Financial records showing money laundering operations, communications with known criminals, and proof that Richard planned to use Elena and her family's properties to facilitate illegal activities." Elena stared at Alex in disbelief, torn between relief at seeing him again and horror at the accusations he was making. The Richard she knew was sophisticated and charming, perhaps a bit aloof, but certainly not the criminal mastermind Alex was describing. Father Santoro looked helplessly between the 3 central figures in the drama, uncertain how to proceed with a situation that had moved far beyond religious protocol into what appeared to be criminal allegations. The sacred space of the cathedral had become something like a courtroom, with the most powerful people in the city serving as an unwilling jury. "These are serious accusations," the priest said carefully. "Perhaps this matter should be resolved privately, away from the sacred ceremony." "No," Alex replied firmly. "Elena has the right to know the truth before she makes this commitment. Richard Ashworth has been using their relationship to gain access to her family's legitimate business operations for his criminal enterprises." Richard's security team began moving more aggressively toward Alex, but several prominent guests, including a federal judge and 2 senators, gestured for them to stop. The presence of so many legal and political figures meant that any violence or suppression of evidence would have serious consequences for Richard's public image and legal standing. Block 9. The evidence unveiled. Alex opened the folder with steady hands, despite the enormous pressure of 200 pairs of eyes watching his every move. The documents inside represented months of investigation and enormous personal risk. But he knew this might be his only opportunity to save Elena from a disastrous marriage. "These financial records show systematic money laundering through Ashworth International Bank over the past 8 years, Alex explained, holding up bank statements and transfer documents. $57 million from drug cartels, arms dealers, and corrupt government officials have been cleaned through supposedly legitimate investments." Several guests with financial expertise leaned forward, recognizing the significance of the documentation Alex was presenting. A federal prosecutor who had attended the wedding as a family friend stood up from his seat, his professional instincts overriding social courtesy. Richard attempted to maintain his composure, but sweat had begun to form on his forehead, despite the cathedral's cool temperature. "These documents are fabricated. This man is clearly obsessed with Elena and willing to create any lie to disrupt her happiness." "I also have recordings," Alex continued, producing a small digital device. "Conversations between Richard and his associates discussing plans to use the Rodriguez family's real estate holdings to expand their laundering operations after the marriage." Elena's father, Carlos, who had been sitting in shocked silence, suddenly stood up with difficulty, his recent heart problems evident in his labored movements. The implications of Alex's accusations were becoming clear. His own business empire could be destroyed if it became associated with criminal activities. "Play the recordings," demanded Senator Patricia Williams, a longtime family friend who had significant influence in law enforcement circles. If these accusations are true, this goes far beyond a disrupted wedding ceremony. The cathedral's acoustics, designed to carry the human voice clearly throughout the space, made the recorded conversation unnaturally loud and clear. Richard's voice was unmistakable as he discussed using the Rodriguez properties as fronts for cleaning money from his special clients. Elena's face went through a succession of emotions: disbelief, horror, anger, and finally a kind of cold clarity as she realized the extent to which she had been deceived. The man she was about to marry had viewed her not as a wife, but as an unwitting accomplice in criminal activities. Victoria Rodriguez grabbed her husband's arm for support, the social implications of the scandal beginning to dawn on her. Their family's reputation, built over 3 generations, was about to be destroyed in the most public way possible. Block 10. The choice. Elena stood frozen at the altar, still wearing her wedding dress but now feeling as though she were in the middle of a nightmare rather than a fairy tale ceremony. The evidence Alex had presented was overwhelming, and Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit the accusations only made them seem more credible. Richard made one final attempt to regain control of the situation, turning toward Elena with the charming smile that had once convinced her of his sincerity. "Elena, darling, you can't possibly believe these fabricated lies from a man who's clearly still obsessed with you. We can sort this out after the ceremony." "The ceremony is over," Elena said quietly, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She began removing her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that now felt like a symbol of deception rather than love. "I can't marry someone who has lied to me about everything." Alex stepped closer to Elena, but stopped at a respectful distance, aware that his sudden reappearance in her life was traumatic regardless of his intentions. "Elena, I know this is overwhelming. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't let you make this mistake without knowing the truth." "You've destroyed everything!" Victoria Rodriguez shrieked, finally finding her voice as the magnitude of the social disaster became clear. "Our family's reputation, the business relationships, the social connections, all ruined because of your jealousy." Father Santoro, recognizing that the ceremony had irreversibly collapsed, began the delicate process of dismissing the congregation. Perhaps it would be best if everyone allowed the families some privacy to sort through these serious matters. The assembled guests began filing out in small groups, their conversations already creating the gossip that would dominate society pages and business publications for months to come. Several law enforcement officials remained behind, recognizing that they were witnessing the beginning of what could become a major criminal investigation. Richard's security team surrounded him as federal agents who had been among the wedding guests identified themselves and requested that he accompany them for questioning. The transformation from groom to criminal suspect happened with shocking speed, his expensive morning coat now looking like a costume from a play that had ended badly. Elena watched Richard being led away, feeling a mixture of relief and devastation as she realized how completely she had misjudged the man she had almost married. Block 11. The aftermath. In the chaos that followed the collapse of the ceremony, Elena found herself alone with Alex in a small chapel adjacent to the main cathedral. Her wedding dress, which had seemed so perfect that morning, now felt like a burden she couldn't wait to remove. The silence between them was filled with 5 years of separation and the overwhelming emotions of the day. "I'm sorry," Alex said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the decision he had made to interrupt the ceremony. "I know this was devastating for you and your family, but I couldn't let you marry him knowing what I knew." Elena looked at Alex with a mixture of gratitude and anger, her emotions too complex to process immediately. "How long have you known? How long have you been investigating Richard?" 3 months of intensive investigation, but I've been concerned about him since your engagement was announced," Alex admitted. "I tried to find a way to warn you privately, but your family had made it clear that I wasn't welcome, and Richard's people were monitoring my activities." The revelation that Alex had been protecting her from a distance, even after their painful separation, brought tears to Elena's eyes. She realized that while Richard had been calculating her value as an asset, Alex had been working to ensure her safety, despite the personal cost. "What happens now?" Elena asked, overwhelmed by the complexity of her situation. Her family's business was potentially compromised by its association with Richard. Her social standing was destroyed by the public scandal, and her future was completely uncertain. "Now you're free to make your own choices," Alex replied gently. "Without deception, without family pressure, without anyone else's agenda influencing your decisions." Elena understood that Alex wasn't asking her to return to their previous relationship or making any demands on her future. He had risked everything to give her the truth and the freedom to choose her own path, regardless of whether that path included him. "I need time," Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Time to process what happened, to help my family deal with the consequences, and to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to meet everyone else's expectations." Alex nodded, respecting her need for space and time to heal from the trauma of the day. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here if you ever want to talk, but I won't pressure you or interfere in your life again." Block 12. New Beginnings. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Elena Rodriguez had rebuilt her life from the ground up. The scandal had indeed destroyed her family's social standing in traditional circles, but it had also freed them from the suffocating expectations of high society. Her father's health had improved dramatically once the stress of maintaining false appearances was removed from his life. Elena had used the crisis as an opportunity to transform her family's business, implementing ethical practices and transparency measures that actually improved their reputation among clients who valued integrity over social connections. The company had become smaller, but more profitable and sustainable. The legal consequences for Richard Ashworth had been severe. Federal investigators had used Alex's evidence to build a comprehensive case against the Ashworth banking empire, resulting in multiple arrests and the seizure of hundreds of millions in criminal assets. Richard himself was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison. Elena had spent the months rebuilding her sense of self, discovering what she actually wanted from life when freed from family expectations and social pressures. She had returned to school to pursue a master's degree in social work, planning to use her business skills to help nonprofit organizations serve underprivileged communities. During this period of personal growth, Elena and Alex had slowly rebuilt their friendship through careful, respectful communication. Their shared experiences and mutual understanding provided a foundation that felt more solid than their youthful romance had been. One evening, as Autumn returned to the city where their story had taken such a dramatic turn, Elena and Alex met for dinner at a small restaurant far from the social circles that had once defined her life. The conversation flowed naturally, covering their work, their dreams, and their gratitude for the difficult lessons they had learned. "I owe you an apology," Elena said as they walked through the quiet streets after dinner. "I chose security over authenticity, and I almost made a terrible mistake because I was afraid to trust my own instincts." "We both made mistakes," Alex replied. "I should have fought harder for us back then, instead of assuming that your family's disapproval meant you didn't really want to be with me." As they paused under a streetlight, Elena realized that the woman who had almost married Richard Ashworth was completely different from the person she had become. The crisis had stripped away illusions and revealed what truly mattered: honesty, integrity, and the courage to choose love over convenience. "I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago," Elena said, looking at Alex with clear eyes. "I don't know if we can recreate what we had before, but I'd like to discover what we might build together now." Alex smiled, recognizing the strength and wisdom that had emerged from Elena's ordeal. "I'd like that too. We can take it slowly, build something real this time." Their story had begun with a dramatic interruption, but its continuation would be written in quiet moments of honesty, respect, and genuine love. The kind that flourishes when two people choose each other freely, without deception or external pressure. Tell us in the comments, from what part of the world are you watching our video? Stories like this remind us that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the courage to disrupt the status quo.